through art. So we want to, folks are greeting each other. I know, this is like always an arts reunion. When you're at the Auburn Avenue Library, it's a family reunion. I know, right? As our panelists come to the stage, I'm going to go ahead and start telling you all who they are. That's how we can do it. I know, right? I know, it's like, that's very loud. Ooh, so glad I have this.
They were. I could see Ed shielding his eyes.
I know,
from up here.
they are. They are quite.
Really are they recording this?
Yes, they are.
Ah, okay.
They're recording. I know. It's
well, that's fine,
info.
but this is about, yeah. I need my sunglasses to come out.
Well, you just don't.
Yeah,
you can't actually see the audience. You just have to relax to that. It's so bright. It's like
so bright.
Broadway, you know.
Yes.
Very bright.
Yes,
How are you?
yes, I'm good. How you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Definitely. Hey, Lynn.
Yes, my buddy.
I know.
Okay, here we come.
Child, this has been a long week. I mean, we're doing, because I mean, we went. The Hammonds House had a party last night.
Oh yeah.
And the night before that, the Black Arts Festival had the opening at Chastain.
Yeah.
And something happened on Wednesday, and something happened on Tuesday. We had a fundraiser for Lucy McBath on Tuesday night, and she's running. She's her son is one that was killed, Jordan Davis.
Oh yes.
And she's running for the 6th congressional district.
Okay.
So she got a good platform, and she's got a good chance of winning, but it's going to depend on turnout and stuff.
Okay.
So,
all right.
We're going to start.
We're going to get started, I think. Where's Beatrice?
Well,
I think we should our panelists are here. And I'm going to start to do a short introduction for each of our panelists. All right. The topic is reclaiming and engaging communities through art. And I have the honor of sitting up here with 3 very dear friends. And rather than read their bios as such, I'm going to tell you a little something personal about each of them, or my take on their bios and their importance. Next to me is Sue Ross, an Atlanta icon, seriously. A photographer, one of the founders of Sistography that has their exhibition here. Is it still here?
It just closed.
Oh, it just closed. Oh. Okay, well, their 25th anniversary exhibition was recently here at the library. Sue has recorded all of Atlanta's history, specifically around politics, art, and culture. And I like to tell the story that she took photographs of Dr. King's funeral with her first camera. So that's how long she's been a photographer and documenting important history of African American history and culture. And then next to Sue is Lynn Linnemeier, another Atlanta icon, a visual artist, amazing artist. It's specifically around preserving stories around the ancestors and working in communities, and has just a long history of exhibition work and working in communities around the Southeast, really. And then next to Lynn Linnemeier is Fabian Williams. Fabian, also known as the occasional superstar, is an amazing artist himself as well. All artists, not artists administrators, we're artists here. Fabian is a public artist as well as a fine artist, but his murals can be seen all over the city, and one recently in Denver of a Black woman as God, and of Stacey Abrams at the corner of Edgewood and Boulevard, Activism Onya. So thank you to our panel for being a part of this conversation today. So the panel is the topic on working in communities. I think it's such an interesting one because all the artists here have years of history of doing so, and there are so many artists that are calling themselves working in communities that don't really do that work and could use this panel, honestly, and some of their expertise. A lot of times we have been critiqued also in settings by saying they're working in communities, not with communities. Coming sometimes as missionaries to communities, telling someone else's story, not their own, or pulling some of that story out. And so I want to just pull from some of y'all's examples of how you've worked in communities. And I'm going to start with Sue.
I'll start with Lynn.
Start with Lynn. I know Lynn's stories. Ooh, ooh. Mount Bayou, Mississippi. Okay, I got some good ones. Okay, I want you to give an example. Because I just sort of did a brief bio, I want your replies to also include stories of your work that you've done in communities. And and this is a conversation with the audience. Many of you all know all of these panelists, so feel free to respond to what they're saying or ask questions as well. Lynn.
Boy, I always get this. Okay,
This is a good one.
Because I was in the middle. I'll start out with, actually, let me start with what I'm wearing. That's probably the best place to start, which is a t-shirt. And I was just telling Charnel and some friends and Curtis in the back that I don't wear this t-shirt. I think I've worn this t-shirt twice. It belonged to a mentor. Ed's saying I'm not talking loud enough. How's that?
There we go.
Okay. It belonged to a mentor that I met when I first started to work in communities, Mr. Milburn Crow. And I met Mr. Crow in Mount Bayou, Mississippi, after having been sent down there. I was working on a project with Duke University, Ole Miss, and Jackson State, and I was collecting photographs of African Americans for an archive that was to be housed at Duke and at Ole Miss. And somebody said, "You need to go meet Milburn Crow. He's got all these photographs." And so I went to Mount Bayou and met Mr. Crow through another photographer, Tom Rankin. And anyway, long story short, we had a wonderful friendship. But one of the things that I used to do in the process of collecting photographs, I was taking my own photographs. And so I would come home, because I was going back and forth to Mount Bayou like every 2 weeks. I was in Mississippi going back and forth. And I would come home and develop these photographs, and then I would print them and take them back. And Mr. Crow started to tape the photographs to the window of his establishment, the Crow's Nest Greyhound Bus Station and Restaurant. And so I came up one day and one week, and I pulled up in front of the store, and there were all these people standing in front of the store window, staring at these photographs. And after speaking with a number of residents, they were like, "Oh, word already got around. Crow got your picture up at the Crow's Nest." And from that, it gave me the paradigm for working in communities, which, my goal was to get people who ordinarily would not go into formal spaces like galleries and stuff like that, to begin to work in communities to get them to come out of these, out of their homes and into these formal spaces. But the paradigm was that basically if you make people the subject of an exhibition, they will come to see themselves. Mm-hmm. And so for the rest of my career pretty much has been about gathering photographs and using these photographs in different artwork that I build and so on and so forth. So that's kind of how I got started. You all don't want to get me started on stories because
I think you should talk a little bit about the Journey Project.
Yes, I was about to say the Journey Project.
Well, I was thinking as I was coming over here, because I've been doing this for such a long time, and I don't want to sound like a relic sitting up here, but it's just kind of funny how things just evolve as you're working. You start out with one model, and then that model folds over into another model. And this model for the Journey Projects wound up being my actually gathering photographs and sewing them into these large-scale installations that are based on a Yoruba tradition of masquerading. And so basically what I do is make these huge, the costume that is worn during an Egungun masquerade, Egungun meaning ancestors, there's a costume that's worn and it's called an agon. And so a good bit of my work through the Journey Projects is about building these ancestor pieces for communities and, actually staging, events in communities around ancestors and ancestry. I actually show up at a spot, scan photographs on site that people bring to me of people that they want to remember. These are people that have passed on. And then I take those photographs, print them out on fabric, and then sew them into these large-scale tapestries. There's one that's right around the corner, as a matter of fact, over at First Congregational Church, and I'm currently updating that piece to add members of the church that that passed on, so that we can update and add those to the piece. So I think that kind of sums it. I got other stuff, but anyway, I'll hog the mic. Now it's one of you.
Well, one reason I wanted you to say that first was because, Lynn, in many ways you learn from your friends and the people that you work with. And Lynn is one of the people I've learned from in terms of working with communities in art. I would probably say Lynn and Sheila Turner above all. And because it's important, it's nice to exhibit your work and to have it in a gallery and all like that, but it's more important to involve the community in the production of the work and in the actual exhibits as they go on, and to share whatever knowledge you have. I don't know what that. This. Let me cut that off.
What does that sound?
I'm sorry, I couldn't figure out what it was. Okay.
No worries. I thought it was like the whole building was about to alert us.
Yeah.
And that was it with her. It'd be going on through the whole session.
I gotta go. Also sharing your knowledge with people in the community. So in cystography, we've always had a component of community involvement and of community learning, and that has been primarily with young people, but not exclusively with young people. And usually we would have a summer workshop or a Saturday workshop series with one group of young people or the other, with the Boys and Girls Club, with the Harlan Center, with the and I guess various with some of the museums. We did something in conjunction with Clark Atlanta. We've done a lot of things, and mainly those are introducing young people into what we do, which is photography, and giving them a camera and teaching them what to do with it, and then letting them go out and document their community and bring those back and then put them on the wall, because it's an extraordinary experience for a young person to have their own art production up on the wall. And so that's something that we've been doing for the last 25 years in cystography, and creating opportunities for young people to be exposed to new fields and then to tell their own story of their community.
Tell their own story. Fabian, give us an example for you of how you've worked in a community and pulled from the history of that community or addressed the history and why you do that work.
Well, I guess I'll start with why. When I first really started noticing murals around the city, it just kind of irritated me that none of them really referred to the history of Atlanta. You know, like the civil rights history, this being like the headquarters of the movement. What really drew me to the city in the first place, I'm from Fayetteville, North Carolina.
Stop
And, yep.
it.
And the city lacked representation, I felt like. So the first opportunity I had to do a mural, I did it about politics. The second mural I did was actually the one I did with you, the paragraphalizer on Edgewood, which is about the exclusion of African American history in history books.
In the King Historic District.
Yeah, so part of it was me growing up in North Carolina and asking my third grade teacher, did George Washington have slaves? Because we were going over the cherry tree gate, you know, and how that was like the only lie he told, and that was like such a big deal. And I was like, well, you know, that's pretty messed up that he lied about chopping down his cherry tree, but did he own slaves? And my teacher was like, yes, but he treated them well. And 8-year-old me was like, but they were slaves. So that situation stuck with me. And so my son at the time was 8, and I was thinking of him when I was doing this mural about the things that we don't know about our own history in this country. And so I painted this stack of books that gets condensed into a paragraph and is inserted into history books, because that's pretty much what happens. I remember reading about the civil rights movement in U.S. history class, and it was literally 1 page. And I was like, there's got to be more to this story, and sure enough it was. So when going around to these neighborhoods, I had the same sort of thinking as the conservatives had in the 50s when they started putting up Confederate monuments. I feel like if we're going to honor the people that came before us, the imagery has to ignite a passion and reference our history as well. So the same way there's, you know, Confederate statues of generals and commanders and soldiers, we need the civil rights soldiers, larger than life, huge, as big as they can possibly be. So these kids can see it and be like, I gotta live up to something bigger than me. So I started going around into neighborhoods, and whenever I saw a dilapidated building, I would paint, you know, something socially or politically relevant to Black people. Mainly because the buildings were just uncared for, and I thought, you know, why not put something that made the people that walk around there feel better about themselves and their situation, and give them some reference to like the greatness that came before them. So that's kind of like.
You have a vision for a future project that is public art in not necessarily African American communities, and the placement of Black people in futuristic, yes, spaces in those communities. Why, talk about that and why that is really a reclaiming.
So I had this notion to start painting Black people in the future tense, because just like, you know, the Jetsons set the tone for the future, Star Trek, and shows like that, etc. Like, we have to start thinking about the world we want to live in and how we exist in it in order to get there. It's like GPS, you know. In GPS, you can't be like, I want to go somewhere. You'd be like, well, you're not going to get any responses. But if you say, I want to go to Linux, it'll give you the directions to Linux. And vision and imagination is the same way. We have to start visualizing what our Black utopia looks like. I feel like utopias is not a word that we use enough. We got plenty of dystopias. We got The Handmaid's Tale, Hunger Games, Scorched Trials. What's the other one? The Purge. You know what I mean? We've seen like our exclusion and straight up extermination in film 1,000 different ways. But when it comes to utopias, all we have is really Wakanda. You know what I mean? So, and as a person who has a very active imagination, I had a hard time thinking of us in the future, which made me curious. It was like, wow, if I can't think of this, then I don't think too many people are doing it. So I really started putting my creative energy behind envisioning us in the future, and it's starting to like appear to me, and it looks totally different than what we've seen. Like, imagine us fully embracing our culture and our ancestry and mixing that with technology, you know, our philosophy of living with, you know, eco-friendly technology. What would the houses look like? How would our clothes look like? What would our schools look like? You know, what type of food would we eat? You know, what type of cars would we drive? Would we even have cars?
Envisioning community.
Exactly. Like, how do we function with, you know, when healthcare is like a right? You know, just like we would be in any community. It's like somebody's sick, you do what you can to help them get well, you know. Like, what does that look like? In the 100, 200 years after we've solved poverty and inequality, which are relatively simple problems to solve if you go ahead and say, well, we're gonna solve it. It really is about like determining, are we gonna do it? We have the technology, there's been plenty of research, we just haven't implemented it because the wrong people are in charge. So I like to like show, you know, like pitch these ideas to children. It's like, imagine your world when you get older. What do you want it to look like? You know, and to me, that's me giving them a GPS destination for them to step into.
Tina Dunkley just walked in.
All right. Yeah.
Yes. Lynn,
Yes.
as a part of the Journey projects,
Yes.
I had the pleasure of working with you on a few of them, and there was this guide, a person in the community that would always appear.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love for you to tell a story about one of your guides, but in the idea of working with the community, and having someone as an ambassador of that community navigate that community rather than being an outsider coming in.
I mean, I think that that's one of, you know, in the manner that I work, because I do a lot of stuff in people's homes. So a lot of the conversations and stuff that I have is at a kitchen table or a dining room table. And in order to be able to move into those spaces, especially in a community where I'm not known, I mean, most of the places where I work, people have no idea who I am. So I just can't pop up and just go do something. I have to have what I call an ally to get me into the community, to introduce me basically to people in the community so that I can garner support, for the projects. So I've had quite a few, and they've been very colorful. Eunice Sanders in Mound Bayou was one who, anyway, I have a book of stories that I could tell you about Eunice. In Madison, and as I talk about these spaces, I hope you notice that these aren't urban areas. These are mainly rural places. So I work a lot in rural areas, mainly because I'm from Southern Pines, North Carolina.
Hey.
Which is 30 miles from Fayetteville. Yeah, because so I grew up in a small town, and so a lot of the work that I do is in rural areas because people tend to leave, those areas, and they're headed to urban areas. So it's interesting what you were talking about, because the project that's coming up is really about my going back home. One of the things that that has been, it's funny because it was revealed to me back in the 90s, and sometimes stuff goes in your head and then out again, and you don't pay any attention to it. I call it my Dorothy story. It's sort of like you want to go home, but home is already there. And so I've spent the better part of my career going into what I call Black sanctuaries. In other words, these are spaces that are governed by African Americans. Mount Bayou is the second largest African American town in the United States. Did a project in Eatonville, Florida, which is really tiny, squeezed in between Maitland and Orlando. Zora Neale Hurston's home. So these are all, really small kind of rural areas where you don't have a lot of people interacting with art and stuff, or if they do, it's on a very limited basis. In looking at these Black sanctuaries, I started to look at the history of West Southern Pines, and lo and behold, it is I grew up in one of the earliest incorporated African American towns in North Carolina. Wow. I had no idea. I mean, it's funny listening to Zora Neale, reading Zora Neale Hurston. She's talking about the Chinaberry tree by the gate. I had a Chinaberry tree by my gate. I mean, our lives just paralleled in so many kind of weird ways. And so she became my shiro. And, here I am looking for home, and what I was looking for in terms of Black sanctuary was already there in the first place. By the time I grew up, Southern Pines had annexed West Southern Pines. But so whenever we had to go across town, I faced, segregation. But as long as I stayed on the west side, people had businesses there. At one point in time, there were over 200 businesses in West Southern Pines, North Carolina. But the stickler was going to East Southern Pines, which made me not think of West Southern Pines as an all-Black community. So whenever I started to delve into the history of the place, it was just amazing that, all this nurturing and stuff that I sought, I got. But I didn't think that I got, because I thought that I was in a town that was segregated. But I actually grew up in an all-Black town. So my goal now is to return home, because everybody left, including my own family. Not everybody, but the people that are left are really struggling. Buildings are boarded up, and that's one of the things that I want to address is these abandoned properties, and just get back to where we were whenever I grew up, which was a very viable community. So that's been this thing with me is all these properties that we have. That's another thing. I worked in Madison with Sandra Hall Cummins, who sadly passed this year. And that part of it was about reclaiming tracts of land, working with the U.S. Department of Agriculture and stuff to help Black people hold on to these huge tracts of land that we have. We've lost so much land over the years. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And, if we continue to...
Siri's responding.
Okay. I mean, so my thing is how can I address, this abandonment of all this property, and to get people to understand that you don't necessarily have to be on farmland. You can do timber farming and other kinds of things to raise income, but the possession of that land is extremely important.
Literally the physical community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Reclaiming
Exactly.
the physical community.
Yes.
Sue, you have recorded history. You have recorded history. You really have. Why? What's the importance of it, and how do you feel like that impacts the future?
Oh, well, I'm not, okay. I'm the daughter of an anthropologist and a social worker. And so my whole life has been about dealing with culture and cultural institutions. Sitting here this morning, listening to Michael Lomax and Ed and Larry and the young curators of our the institutions that I grew up with in the AU Center. That all is my community. I grew up on the campus of the AU Center. I grew up with in segregated educational institutions. I participated in desegregation of this community, and so now, I've been able to work and serve the people of Atlanta through both my formal work at City Hall and my community work through my photography. I like to document, and so I do document. I can't remember people's names if I don't write them down on the back of the pictures. So that's one reason. But the other reason is just that it's my form of a diary. It's my form of collecting the history as we make it. And it is something that can be shared with people now and can be here for people in the future to see. My very first job, formal job where I got a paycheck, was in the Trevor Arnett building. So I'm going to touch both Marita and Clint in this one, working with Lillian Lewis in the Negro Collection, which is the basis of the Atlanta University archives, and but in the actual Trevor Arnett Library building, and that was when I was maybe a freshman in college, and it was a summer job, and we were cataloging all of these. At that time, there was no museum at Atlanta University. Everybody checked out the art and had it in their offices, and I checked out the books. It was a non-circulating collection, but all of the Harlem Renaissance novels were out of print, and so they had copies there, and so I got to check them out because I worked in the library. So I have very fond memories of that library and that collection, and also working with papers in that collection. There was a whole there's a great series of correspondence between C. Eric Lincoln and Malcolm X when Malcolm X went to Mecca. You can read that. Over at the Atlanta University Woodruff Library now, So I grew up with a sense of history. I grew up with a sense of photography history, in that my family had photographs going back to the Civil War, and I ended up being kind of the keeper of those, and will be incorporating them into some future projects, working with some of my artist colleagues, and. But mainly it's why we document our communities is that somebody has to tell our story, and we might as well be the ones to do it.
Absolutely. I'm going to encourage audience participation and interaction as we go. So someone out there, don't let me call your name, think of a question, okay, in order to ask these amazing artists before the panel ends. But I wanted to ask, and anyone can answer, given the current political atmosphere, I think the urgency of now and what is history being made, and I feel like a surge of activism, and our next panel is on activism, but I wanted to, as it relates to community and artists working in communities, what do you all feel needs to be the next project or the next effort? Fabian talked a bit about visioning futuristic, African Americans in the future, but the next, and then Lynn talked about going back home and reclaiming sanctuary.
I want to take him back home with me.
Okay, I'm going to collaboration happening right
as we speak.
Because it's so funny, because one of the things that, everything begins, you begin with an idea. Mm-hmm. And one of the ideas that I had, that I've already proposed, that I'm actually putting together with some folks at home, is to actually do outdoor exhibitions in front of these abandoned houses, to just go back. And it was like I was telling a friend of mine at home, I don't know how to do this because this is something I've never done before, which is to go back in and actually reclaim a part of a town. How do you do that? One of the things that I know that, that here again we go back with this whole thing of mentorship and who's going to mentor you and so on and so forth. Part of it is when you leave a place and you've been gone for 40 years, the same people that that you left aren't there anymore, or some of them are there. But you're dealing with a whole nother community because people have grown up in 40 years. There have been people that have grown up and they've been doing all sorts of things. So I was telling a friend of mine who's from Robeson County, and I said, well, I don't know what to, I don't know
Where
what
my grandmother's
to do.
from.
Oh, really? Okay.
Jacksonville.
Okay, see, now, we go with North Cat. Anyway, so I said, I don't know how to do this, and the only way that I could figure out how to do it was to do what I do, which is actually to go in, meet with people, use these photographs, and then blow them up really, really big, and then just put them on these properties to just reclaim these properties that these people lived here, at this time. This was a family home. There were gardens here. There were all these things that were here, and just as a start, because I don't know what to do.
So what I started doing, this has been like what I've been doing for like the last 3 years, is I don't necessarily go and ask for permission.
Well, I can't do it in this system.
I know. I mean, these are calculated risks that I take because, like I look at the buildings and I look at how long they sit abandoned, and I'm like, is anybody gonna roll up on me if I start painting this building? And I'm like, if they don't care enough to take care of the building, or they don't live in Georgia, I paint them.
Right.
And hopefully they don't show up. A couple times they showed up and called the police on me. But luckily, the reason why I seem to be able to get away with this in Atlanta is because the police officers that pull up on me are usually like, "You don't like this painting?" To the owner, which diffuses the anger a lot of times. And I try and explain to the owners that, look, like these murals are gonna bring value to this building, if anything, and attention, because they tend to become tourist attractions. So my bigger goal now is to turn Atlanta into an arts tourism destination. But the focus of the work is reflective of both the people and the history, which differs from cities like Miami that has a huge mural festival called Art Basel. Well, no, it's not a mural festival, but there's a lot of murals and artwork that happen in Miami in December during that time. So taking a note from them, I wanted to paint the city in a similar fashion, but doing different things that affect, the people that live there. For instance, like planting fruit trees where the murals are, putting statues in abandoned housing lots, because again, it's to me, it's all about turning these neighborhoods into open air museums. And so when the kids walk outside, they see, they'll see a mural by Fahama Peku or Hebrew Brantley or me, and, I paint from a historical purse. So I'm like, I feel like what I'm doing is gonna be eventually looked at as something that museums wanna archive and whatnot. And that's because I paint about history. And if you take some of those ideas, but then add in things that help, the people that live around there, like one of the things I really dislike is pulling up in the West End and having a kid trying to sell me water so he can play football. I feel like that is not how you're supposed to spend your summer. Hustling on the corner. I hate it. So what I want to do is have it to where, if anything, there's food everywhere. You know what I mean? You can grab an apple or a peach or some walnuts and get a snack. And that's one thing you don't have to worry about. Now going further, some of these houses, through programs like Invest Atlanta and Westside Future Funds, some of these houses can be fitted with geothermal heat pumps, solar paneling, so you don't have to worry about utilities. Why would you do that? Because when I left my job, I went from work making six figures to like $10,000 a year. So my electricity and gas kept getting cut off. And part of my thinking as well, if we have the sun and the sun powers the house, then that's one less thing I have to worry about, so I can focus on this creative stuff. You know what I mean? A lot of it is like about freeing up your mind so you can focus on the things that matter. You know what I'm saying? And technology can help leverage that playing field. And creativity is all about problem solving. You know what I'm saying? And if you design a whole neighborhood to be one efficient, to where someone doesn't have to worry about their electricity or gas getting cut off, and their kids can focus on creative problem solving, then you'll see the society move ahead, light years in a very short amount of time. And so really, and going back to North Carolina, like, I'm actually ashamed that I've not done one mural in Fayetteville.
See.
This
might be,
not one.
Might be the moment.
As a matter of fact, the mural I did in Denver of the God was the first mural I've done outside of Atlanta.
Wow. I understand.
So
Yeah.
now when I go back home, because my mom still lives in Fayetteville, when I go back, I'm gonna take my little bag of cans and I'm gonna disappear, because I know my mom is gonna be like, no. I'm gonna disappear for a few hours and I'm gonna paint some building there, and hopefully I won't get ran up on.
All right.
I'm coming.
Okay.
So we have to actually wrap this up, but I do want to honor one question. It's okay. Anybody have a question? Okay, I'm hosting the next panel. Oh, 2 questions.
Okay.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I want to get your opinion. It's so nice to see you, Susan. I've known Susan for 30 years. And she was one of the first people I met when I moved to Atlanta, and I love her. But what do you think of do you think the murals and the public art is really reclaiming communities in the newly developed, more gentrified communities around Atlanta?
Well, in this community, which is becoming gentrified in the 4th Ward area, and Fabian has the use of murals to preserve the histories of those who have not been as recognized as Martin Luther King did not create the civil rights movement by himself. He was a wonderful man, but you can look at this fantastic mural that Fabian's done of Jose Williams in space that's on the back of the Studioplex parking garage, or look at the murals of John Lewis and Evelyn Lowry, or look at I think it's more likely in gentrifying communities that the building might get torn down because somebody may buy the property, but in some cases they may keep it. In the case of the Studioplex one, the people that owned the parking garage, they wanted a mural with flowers or something like that. And because there were community people on the panel that participated in the selection, they wanted something more reflective of a part of Auburn Avenue. And even though when the family first thought about it, they were the Williams family, they had mixed feelings, I think, about a mural.
It was mainly because of the way I did the initial sketch. Yeah. Like I took like a pose from Fred Astaire and put a suit on him. And they was like, "That is not my father at all." Yeah. So I had to actually go and read up on him. Yeah. And then I met with their nephew, and he explained to me like who Hosea was and like how he was like Hosea was a G. Mm-hmm. He was like a real roundaway guy, but he was scrappy, and he was all about really holding up like poor people and the unheard. And his major symbol was his overalls.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
And so, like, once I put the overalls on him and, like, you know, masculine them up a little bit, they was like, cool.
That was cool, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
in West Southern Pines, the idea is to head off gentrification. It's not gotten there yet, but Southern Pines, I don't know, if you play golf, you'll know Pinehurst.
That's
North
true. Yeah, I
Carolina.
forgot about that. Yeah.
Yeah, Pinehurst, and the crazy thing about it, and talking to a friend of mine who moved back, is West Southern Pines is in Moore County, which is a tier 1, what they call a tier 1 county. It's basically not eligible for a lot of federal assistance because of the amount of money in the town. In other words, this is a very wealthy town with black areas that were service areas for the golf courses. So All Black Town, Taylortown served Pinehurst. Black people couldn't live in Pinehurst, so they put them just outside of Pinehurst so that they would have a space that was short enough for them to get to work on time. And the same thing for West Southern Pines. West Southern Pines grew out of feeding the golf industry. So, you know, but the golf courses are expanding now. And that's, you know, my thing, you know, and a group of us, you know, that left, now it's like, okay, we're gonna lose this community if we don't do something.
That's also why I started painting pictures of black people in the West End, because my thinking is if you put up enough black people on these walls, huge, it may deter those coming to live there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I call it social iconography.
I mean, but seriously,
It affects the ethics of a community.
Firewalls.
A black middle class will be attracted to
Yeah.
what they see as social iconography in that area. Thank you all.
Thank you.
That was fun.
Thank you all very much. Thank you all very much as well. So, and Charmaine, good job. Good job, keeping it moving. But we are going to serve lunch now. So we are going to break and have lunch, and we will be back in here at 1:20.
Okay.
So please have lunch and then come on back, talk to the artists. There's some other panelists that are still outside, so ask questions and what have you. See you after lunch. Thank you.
My cousin, I just left there. Well, I